Next, we're going to look at the training month. And so we often refer this as the mesocycle. So within a training cycle, there will be many mesocycles inbuilt in that. And if we just operate off of a simple system, there will be 12 individual mesocycles across the training year, and they'll be allocated to either the in-season, off-season, or pre-season. So nice and simple. The main outcomes from this section are just so you've got a couple of simple ways that you can create a program that accounts again for training load volumes, the ability to individualize things, and ultimately being able to load at the right time and ease back at the right time as well. So you've got a little bit more detail now in terms of how the individual training block actually looks. So when we start looking at the training month, the first thing is, okay, what phase are we in? So is it in-season, off-season, or pre-season? That obviously gives you a priority around, are we trying to prepare, prevent, or perform? So if it's in-season, clearly, we're going to not be chucking lots of extra volume into this. We have got a couple of simple principles to follow, and we'll be diving into those right now. But in effect, we want to be able to plan out a month effectively. So these are our three key considerations. One is around load management, ensuring that across the training cycle, there are weeks where we push and there are weeks when we pull, so that in the long run, we can continue to make progress. In order to, get that adaptation, the body needs periods of time, periods where we can, challenge it, overload it. We also need times where we can recover as well. We can't continue to overload the body, otherwise it leads to things like overtraining, as we've already mentioned. So using something like a traffic light system and tapering are two effective means of making sure we're in the right place at the right time. So if you've looked at the training calendar, you know when your distinct phases are. And in this block, there's a key event coming up. Well, we can work back from that again to know, well, during that week, we're going to be looking to deload. And 2 weeks prior to that, potentially, that's the week where we're going to be looking to really, really push the players to develop those qualities. So in terms of load management, again, I've got Anthony Turner's paper here as a nice sort of overview of this 3-to-1 loading paradigm. And this 3-to-1 loading paradigm, in effect, provides 3 weeks of increased volume or volume load overall. So the volume times by the load that you're placing on the athlete. And then 1 week of deloading. And so this is a nice, easy way of thinking about planning out that cycle. 3 weeks of consecutive increases in load, followed by a week of relative deload. Now, again, depending on when in the cycle that important match is, you'd probably look to reduce a bit of volume in that week, or maybe it makes more sense to have it the week after the match. Again, it depends on the context. But as a rule of thumb, 1 out of the 4 needs to be a relative deload, particularly during times like in season when we're trying to mitigate against fatigue to enable that recovery so in the long term players can keep progressing. The red line demonstrates the fatigue, so you can see fatigue creeping up, and then once we deload, the fatigue drops, performance increases, and we get what's called supercompensation. So that's a very, very important week here to have in. So just off the back of that, something key to start thinking about is when are you going to put your deload weeks in? Why are you putting them in that week? And ideally put them before or after the most difficult training week in the block. We can also use something called a traffic light system, which enables identification of priority sessions. So green sessions, and I've got examples of this in just a second, green sessions are going to be priorities such as matches and camps in that training phase. Orange means they can be modified to, if, for example, players are feeling particularly fatigued, we know on a visual level that is a session that can be changed. And then if it's a red session, this is just sort of like a nice to have. Well, that's going to be the first thing that's going to get dropped. So it becomes essentially a bit of a non-essential. And so it can look a little bit like this. The orange sessions, as I say, are your kind of ones that can be modified. We've got greens, which are priorities. We've got reds, which are non-priorities. So I've just put together a very simple training plan here with no real level of detail, just to kind of give you an example of how this works. But this is a school level NAGS player who in week 2 of this mesocycle has got a NAGS camp, so that's a really, really key priority. A club match on weekends and national finals coming up. They're training twice a week with the club. They've got an S&C on a Monday. They've also got this school training match going on as well. So in terms of a hierarchy, the green sessions are ones that are absolute priorities. Oranges can be shifted around a little bit, modified. Red's the first thing to go. So you'll notice then that in week 2, this is our most important week of the whole cycle because it's a NAGS selection camp. There's a school training session, which is a red session. So that's definitely going to go because we want to be as fresh as possible. This is going to be our deload week because we want to be going into the NAGS camp feeling nice and fresh so we can perform at our best for selection. The club training on a Thursday is going to be eased off. We're going to speak to the coach and say, I've got the NAGS camp coming up. Would it be okay if my involvement is reduced a little bit so I'm feeling really fresh? And hopefully we've got a good relationship with the coach to enable that kind of to happen. S&C session again is going to be a deload on that Monday, and the club training on the Tuesday is an opportunity to keep pushing on. So you can see how it's a useful visual summary. So all you're going to do is write out all the sessions for the month, highlight the key ones in green, the kind of modifiable ones in orange, and the kind of non-essential ones in red, which are the first ones to go if they conflict with the priority. Then in terms of tapering is very simply a means of reducing training load to facilitate recovery and increase performance. And sort of research in this area sort of suggested a 2-week exponential reduction in training volume of between 40 to 60% is the most efficient strategy to maximise training goals. So again, we can see this image from here. So we've got 100% of normal training here. A typical linear approach would be day after day, we just reduce it step by step. Whereas an exponential decrease is we're going to reduce the most significantly early on, and then it's going to just ease off slightly as we go in towards that competition at the end of the 2 weeks. So typically, as a rule of thumb, 40 to 60% across a 2-week period going into a key period of time as a tapering approach is the most effective strategy to achieve that kind of recovery. So again, a little slightly shorter video here, but just again, an overview of the kind of approaches you can take during the training month to ensure that you've got periods to really push on with the training week and periods to recover to ensure that you can perform at your best when it matters the most.